Paul Issa, welcome to Profile.
Thank you, Archie.
All right, very delighted to have you, and I want to read out a little bit of your resume so people who may not be as familiar, although you're a very familiar face on local TV, and we'll get to why. Cultural influencer and business leader, deputy chairman of the House of Issa and his subsidiary, the Issa Hotels and Resorts Limited, which owns and operates couples resorts. You are a philanthropic leader, if we can say that as well. Chairman of the Issa Foundation and the Edna Manley College of the Visual and Performing Arts here in Kingston.
Former chairman,
and media and arts patron, director of the Independent Radio Company Limited, and involved with several cultural and arts organizations in Jamaica. When you think about your path, what words come to mind?
I've always been interested in the arts. That's essentially what you would say my passion is. When I was younger, I studied I was a painter for a while. Then I studied acting. I went to acting school in New York. I wrote. I started writing fiction. This is in my early 20s. And so that's always been sort of my first love, the arts.
Even before you in your 20s, even as a younger person, as a child, were you always interested in the arts?
Yes, always, as a kid and as a teenager. But later on in life, I decided, I inherited a share in our family business when my parents died, when I was in my late 30s. And I thought, well, I better learn something about business. So I went back to university at age 40. And I completed my college education. I got a Bachelor of Business Administration and a Master's of Business Administration. Came back and started working in the family business. And I've been doing that ever since. Was that the first time you were working in the family business? Yes.
Or did you have exposure to it before?
No. Well, exposure, but not working in it.
Let's step back before that time to talk about just growing up, first of all, in Kingston.
Yeah.
What was Kingston like when you were growing up?
Well, it was very different in those days. I grew up at the end of the colonial period. My father was the chairman of the tourist board from the mid-50s on into the early 60s. And he was like a very, Issa was his name. He was a very kind of popular, charismatic businessman who was very involved in the development of Jamaica, particularly as a tourist destination. And so we were always very much exposed to his great belief in Jamaica. And he was a real patriot. He was born here. His father came over from Palestine when his father was a teenager with his father, my great-grandfather. They settled here, and my father was born here and grew up here, and he loved Jamaica. It was his own. And, in the 1970s, a lot of business people and middle-class people were frightened by the political situation of that period, and a lot of people left, as you know. And he never even considered it, even when things were, got pretty dire and pretty scary. So we were always very much exposed to that love that he had of Jamaica.
What about your mother?
My mother was actually an American. She was from Brooklyn, New York. She was a Lebanese girl. Her parents were also immigrants. They had come from Lebanon and settled in New York. She loved Jamaica too. She came, she married my father and came, and they settled here and lived here until they both died.
What was family life like growing up?
It was chaotic. We were a big family, 6 kids. I was the youngest. My parents were, I hate to use this word, but upwardly mobile. I mean, remember, my father was the son of a poor immigrant, a merchant, and he was a self-made man. Well, my grandfather was a self-made man, and my father more so. And he was very much a public figure. So I don't know if home life suffered a bit, but he was an extraordinary person, and I think we all learned a lot from him. So it was great. It was a great time to be alive and to be in Jamaica.
What were some of the things he was teaching you? You say you learned a lot from him.
Well, he was just very positive about everything. He was famous for, people who still remember him say that he couldn't understand how he always remembered everybody's name. And he was very interested in people. People loved him. So none of us really inherited that trait. But my brother, Lee, who is still a merchant, that's what our original family business was before we went into hotels. We were merchants. And my brother has that streak in him of, meeting your customers, standing on the floor, greeting the customers as they come into the store. And that's I think, why we did so well as a family in the retail trade back in the day.
What kind of challenges did it present growing up in a well-known family, because especially given your father's role?
It was difficult in some ways. You kind of felt like you were living in a fishbowl. The community was much smaller then. It was a quieter time. I mean, a lot of people, I think, over-romanticize the good old days in Jamaica. They were good in some ways. Yep. Very peaceful. There was very little crime. But for most people, I think most people were not living all that well, as I remember it. For a certain few, it was a wonderful place to be. But it was, there were certain evils of colonialism and imperialism, and there were a lot of, I wouldn't say that there were more poor people then, but I feel that there wasn't much of a middle class then, and there is now, and that's a good thing.
I want to talk a little bit about the art, and the education involving the art, but we have to take our first break on Profile. My guest is Deputy Chairman of the House of Issa, Paul Issa, and we're back with you after these messages.